appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Stefan.
Thank you, Claire.
Okay, so our next guest has joined us. There he is. So our next guest is Martin Kruger. Martin Kruger is one of the most influential and revered design thinkers in South Africa. An architect, artist, and urbanist, Martin has been practicing in Cape Town since 1991. He led renowned design practice Kruger studio, and now Martin Kruger Associates, the firm responsible for the award-winning projects like the BP headquarters in Cape Town and the University of Pretoria Law Faculty Building. His studio has received several design accolades for architecture over the years, and Martin believes in the evolving process of design, and his philosophy is all buildings are cities, and the city is a big house. He is the co-author of the book Texture and Memory, the Urbanism of District 6, and was a founding member of the first chairman of the Urban Design Institute of South Africa. Welcome, Martin. We are looking forward to seeing what you have to share with us. Martin's topic he's talking about is drawing, meditation, painting, Cape places, and the city.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Now, what do I do?
Share screen.
Is there an option?
Should be at the bottom of your screen.
There should be a green button that says share screen.
Okay. Here we go.
Perfect.
There we go. You see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Sorry, I just want to make it a full screen. Okay, thank you. I will start with showing where I come from and who I am and what the influences are in my life. And through the process, hopefully, we learn something about meditation, design process, and yeah, I mean, and how important cities are for us. Okay. Right, so I was born in Paarl and Berg River Valley. I'm showing some images. And of course, the beautiful winelands of the Cape and these uncompromising mountains that you have here. And the winelands and the wine. And these white structures that are called Cape buildings. I prefer to say Cape, not Cape Dutch, but with these dark roofs and vegetation. And often I think they were the first green buildings that were there. That's Paarl Rock and looking over the valley. It's also the origin of Afrikaans. The Afrikaans Taal Monument is there. And I really am very fond of Afrikaans, the language, and I write poetry in Afrikaans. My mother's family were Roos that came from Stellenbosch. And this farm called Libertas, we visited as children. This is a drawing at the bottom by James Walton of the Fell Run. And I remember vividly going to these farms and Stellenbosch with the oak trees and the beauty of these farm structures. And it seemed to come visit me later in my life. At the moment, next to the dam, you see Libertas has now been subdivided mainly into suburbia, which is unfortunately what happens. and there's not much left of the farm. And yeah, we then moved to Johannesburg, or to the East Rand, actually a place called Boksburg, and the influence of mine dumps to trade mountains became apparent. And we used to go to Johannesburg by train with my mother to go and do the monthly shopping at the OK Bazaars, and there were only paper bags in those days. And I remember the paper bags breaking sometimes. My mother would have a fit, but we would take the train from Boksburg. And when you go by train, you're a passenger and you're actually just seeing the world go by. And I think that's where architecture and the city started for me. Arriving in Johannesburg, and the architecture of Johannesburg is actually quite amazing, quite urban, and there's these layers of different periods that spoke to me. This is a photograph by David Goldblatt of Illof Street in the 60s. So I can imagine I would have been a little boy with my mother, and we would go to the OK Bazaars, that kind of era. And you see that man with the paper bag. And living in Boksburg was quite a boring place before TV. TV came out when we were in matric. Jeremy would know that. And one of the things that I did was to climb onto the roof and look at the clouds, sort of cloud watching. And I think, I didn't know that at the time, but I think it was the beginning of a meditation of sorts, cloud watching. In a sense, it probably influenced what I was doing and my artistic capabilities being developed. Because I think with meditation, you tune into certain spheres that influence you. And my father had this set of encyclopedias, which I would page through and draw from them. And I learned to draw myself by looking at things in the encyclopedias and copying them and so on. And then later went to University of Pretoria. This was the Diagonal Street Market, and it became the subject of my thesis in 1983. And I remember still supporting Western Province, and with people like Jeremy Malande and the crowd of Blue Bull supporters, was quite a lonely existence. And this was my thesis drawing. It was Diagonal Street and preserving the front, and the influence of Aldo Rossi's drawing made this possible. It is an urban street that then connects to the environment, and the idea of transferring air rights. And that was the model. In those days, we built the models by hand, and we didn't have what the students now do, the lazy cutting option. I worked in Johannesburg and Pretoria, and later then went to study urban design in Cape Town. Came to Cape Town in 1991, just after the release of Nelson Mandela, and I found I wanted to do something different with my life. I was working for a commercial firm that were doing mainly office parks with a theme of colonial wisdom. So this is the Boerkaap, Street of the Boerkaap, and I really like the urbanism of that. I live in the Waterkant, which I call the Onderste Boerkaap, and it's similar kind of architecture. So my urban design thesis was the Culemborg site. You see it on the right there, which is the old railway lines, and creating then a new waterfront for the city. So it takes over the space that the railway shunting yards and technical areas use, and creates new avenues from the mountain and connects District 6, Woodstock and Salt River, because portions of District 6 still exist below the highways, the freeways. Sorry. And then I was lecturing at the Cape Technicon, and the building of the Cape Technicon is placed in District 6. It's a very ugly building, I must unfortunately say that, and very big. And I felt that we've got to do something. So we did a book on District 6, and that book is called Textures and Memory, the Urbanism of District 6. And we found what it was like, and it's quite a research document, and is sought after by people all over the world. It's gone out of print now, and it's one of my objectives to get it reprinted. Yeah, District 6, I think, was a form of urban genocide, such as Vredendorp and Johannesburg, where, because of slum clearances and what they call ordered urbanization, the apartheid regime demolished parts of this, which is unfortunately a big urban loss to the Cape. Okay, then I got involved with projects in the Cape, the rural areas of the Cape. This is a sketch I made on a serviette, and it talks about a sort of a Cape Georgian facade in a modern way, with these thick walls that accommodate stairs and fireplaces and so on. The client didn't like this idea. This was the year 2000, and I was in Paris, and this serviette I drew on was done just before a bus hit me the next day, which I survived. So 21 years ago, and this idea that was then later formulated for another project in Franschhoek that I'll show you a bit later. So the first Cape project was at near Hermanus, and we followed the ideas of these long barns that were connected. So you see the site plan, and you see the plan. This is the Klein River retreat, called South Winds. And there's some photographs of it. So it's the idea of Cape architecture referring to the work of Mario Botta and Le Corbusier and so on, but with the theme of Cape arches as entrances, and the floating roof idea. We also did a brewery for the Birkenhead Brewery at Stanford that's actually been changed subsequently, unfortunately. And the architecture was also this idea of long buildings, long barns, and therefore accommodating the brewery process. And then there was this building called Nieuwe Sion, which inherited a few old buildings, and we created a new werf and placed the new house at the end of this werf. And over 20 years, this place has really grown to be quite beautiful. The client wanted thatch roofs, and we made the thatch quite thick, and we had specific details on the edge of that roof. If you look at the middle photograph, you see a tile detail there, which is a kind of a drip, because there are no gutters to thatch. And then we also made shutters and windows that were quite special. So the focus was on the apertures, the gates, and the small details, and then inheriting the Cape long barns quality. The gate sort of influenced in a South African way by the work of Scarpa, working with timber and steel. And then these deep set openings, you see this was just after the completion, and the stair on the side that goes to the Zolderkamer. Another Cape building was done on the back of Chapman's Peak, and there it's quite a steep site, so we worked with these long elongated buildings that form the space, and in between that is a vaulted space that links the two long barns. So we're working with the contours. It's placed in a kind of a forest, and that's the interior. It's for Wilma Cruz and her husband, John Cruz. They've unfortunately now moved and sold the house, but it also accommodated her ceramic collection that you see there next to the kitchen. And what I also want to say that she had a beautiful art collection, and we actually made the gutters of this vault out of glass so that there's light coming into the walls. And that's looking from her studio up to the main house. You see those two gable ends. And then recently we completed this project in Franschhoek called Le Poirier, which means the pear orchard. It's a building we did for Paula Disbury. You can look at Le Poirier Franschhoek on Instagram if you want to. And one can actually go and visit the farm. It's now a sustainable small farm dealing with all kinds of things that you will see there. And so the architecture is again speaking to these arches, which is set a theme in our work. And then the building has got these roofs of steel that makes the barns longer. Those are the guest rooms, and that's the kind of a manor house that you see there. And that's the front where the river is. And on the front, it's quite a glazed facade. It's quite contemporary, where on the other side, towards the vineyard at the entrance, it has more a theme of the Cape. So that top picture shows you it in morning light, and that's also the bottom facade towards the river. And this was just when we planted the vineyards, and the timber was quite young. And the gardens are quite beautifully made by Dani Steenkamp, and the client actually was very good and told us exactly what she wanted, even in the color themes of the garden. And that's the interior, the kitchen on the right, and the manor house lounge on the left. We've got this fluted concrete ceiling. And then the theme of arches are carried through. So the thick walls actually is applied, and the kitchen sits in the thick walls, and they've got niches and fireplaces and so on. Okay, so I think traveling, one wants to learn some urban lessons. Earlier days, I kept a diary and made sketches. Nowadays, one takes photographs. But what I like about traveling is to see what the urban world could be, because we are really impoverished through modernism and zoning. The urban environment had really been impoverished by developments. And this is in the Jordaan in Amsterdam. This is Ronchamp, which was taken in the snow when I first went to Europe. That was in 1982, before final year. And what I quite like about Ronchamp, I think it was the breakaway from modernism by Corp, and probably the first time regionalism has been applied. And people talk about the monumentalization of the vernacular, and I quite like that. It's quite a unique building. And I think it's got nothing to do with BIM, which is building management systems, which I also don't understand. And this is a street in Bologna next to the big public space. And this was pre-COVID. But I mean, Bologna is a real city, unlike Venice, where people live in precincts, come and eat Bolognese food, and come to town every Saturday. And it's really an alive city and quite pedestrian, and it's got beautiful shops and beautiful eateries. But I think for me, this is real cities. And I was lucky to go to the Palio to see that. That's quite a thing to do. I think anybody should do that. It's a medieval horse race around the Siena Il Campo, and it's over in a few seconds. And this, you can see this was also before social distancing. And that's the Il Campo's floor. After they cleared the space the next day, I quite like the textures and the reflection of the light. And this is Rome with the colonnades. You know, I like to walk in the forest, and I like to believe that architecture is another form of nature. And nature is also a form of architecture. You know, these cathedral spaces that you see when you walk in Newlands Forest. I like that analogy. And this is the riverside of the Gracht in Amsterdam, where people are just sitting enjoying summer, which the summer is now running out for them. I like Amsterdam as a place, and I've got colleagues there, and we work collaboratively. We're trying to get into projects there, although it's quite a difficult place. But yeah, I quite like Amsterdam as an urban edifice. And this is Francine Bin's Meccano building, the library in Delft, which I like as a place where students could sit in summer. This was taken in winter, and it's an absolutely beautiful library to see. And this is Sverre Fenn's building in Hamar, and we've recently taken part in a competition adjacent to this. We're waiting for the outcome of this competition. But what I like about that, it was a castle that was bombed by the Swedes, and then a farmer built it into a barn, and then Sverre Fenn turned it into a museum for sort of Viking medieval artifacts. Beautiful structure, beautifully made. And unfortunately, this is the Wertmüller Center here. It doesn't apply often to commercial places, but this was my teacher Rudolf Eitenburgert's building, quite a controversial building, and didn't really work for how it was planned, but it is an interesting piece of architecture. And I always thought that it's a pity that it couldn't get a new life like Sverre Fenn gave to the Hedmark Museum in Hamar. Okay, then I got involved in my practice early on with working with Rudolf Eitenburgert and making space for the Cape Town Olympic bid. And this was also on the Culemborg, where the stadium was going to be. And you can see how that links the Trafalgar Park to the harbor. And then the village where the athletes would stay was quite a high density environment. And the idea, we took part, Pedro Ruiz and myself started working together. We took part in the competition. And we had the idea that the stadium would be inside the city. So you see the urban wall on the right here. And the stadium sits inside, very much like Nîmes and Avignon and places like that, even in Verona, where the arena sits inside the city. This was another model that we did also for the Olympics, where the stadium was then moved to another position, and there was a over this railway line, there was an indoor sports center that we made. And then the housing was done at a very high density of about 150 dwelling units per hectare, which is about the density of Paris and Vienna. And I remember the traffic engineers were really very upset about that. This is a project we did for a competition in Soweto at Freedom Square, and we captured the footprints of people that walked over the square, because that's where the Freedom Charter was developed. And we had a market, we had some housing, and we had a community hall and places where you could do slaughter and so on, and some housing. We came second, I believe. This is another drawing we did for Pan-African Parliament competition. I often believe that drawings are your way of expressing, your meditative way of tuning into the intuitive nature of projects, so that you do what has to be done. This is sort of diagrams of projects. So in a sense, it's a kind of a language of diagrams. And in our work, we often make these diagrams, which are really a summary, a spatial summary of what the projects are about. You see the BP competition at the top there, you see the Grassa Machel there, and also the Culemborg, and so on. So often these small drawings, I've learned that a long time ago by a colleague of mine, that these little maquettes and small drawings that you make give you the energy of the concept. And then we worked with the idea when we did BP that buildings are cities, and those things have been promoted by many people. You know, I mean, Alberti in the 15th century spoke about La Piccola Città, which is the house, but also then later Van Eyck and them spoke about the house as a small city, and the city as a big house. So the idea that buildings can be a dynamic organism, it's an enabling structure with identity, social responsibility, legibility, place of interaction, a hierarchy of spaces, layering, public manners, generosity, with a vision and cross-pollination. And this is District 6 from the book. You could see the figure ground, very rich land use structure also. So this is the law faculty building. We followed that idea of the building as city. So these public spaces, you see the auditorium on the right, the human rights building, and then the library serving as a translucent screen to the public space, that you can see the activity of students there, and then courtyards at the back with lecture facilities and offices, and then the streets become like the public streets that connect these public spaces. And that's the initial model and the concept diagram. Some of the photographs, and from, I think it's taken from Yasmin, the women's residence, the facades have been giving these sort of different windows to different offices, so that not all the offices are the same. And this was the Grassa Machel residence. I did, Pedro Ruiz left the practice in 2005, so we did this building at that time. And it's also then an urban building fronting a street, and this was taken just after completion. And this is a little video that shows a sports center next to it, and the Grassa Machel residence. You see the big roof there and the public street. And I'm very happy with this building and the way it's made, you know, and it speaks to, in a sense, the Boerkaap staggering, stepping down on a site that you see in the Boerkaap. The building reflects to that, and also speaks to a building in Claremont that Norbert Rosendahl did with this big roof. And the idea was that this would be a juncture where the middle campus will be linked to the lower campus, and students could take this street, and an arcade could link to the bus, which will take them to the upper campus. So yeah, so I do a lot of drawings. Always, I try and stay fit. It's my kind of gym. So I don't draw this fast, but I prefer to stay in practice with drawing, and I believe in the analog and not in computers until you have to. I really respect people like Alvaro Siza, who often works in coffee shops and make these drawings and then develop them later into little maquettes and big models that he can get into. This is the Acropolis. It's just a quick drawing. This is a drawing I did, influenced by Ronsard and Le Corbusier. So I have tons of sketchbooks that I hold. And during lockdown, I was busy writing, doing poetry and making sketches and posting on Instagram. So my partner, Catherine Bull, she's got fourfold art, and she teaches meditative drawings. And these are meditative drawings that are done blindfolded. So it's drawings that you start with music and you draw, you can see the pencil lines, and then we use feathers to draw with and ink to put another layer to it, and sometimes related to music or just meditation or drawing breath. And these meditative drawings then sometimes become paintings. This is just a drawing of a portion of Venice, but then I made prints of it later. It was also a gift for a friend who recently died. And so I like to draw things that inspire me. This is part of the Acropolis again. I'm intrigued by archaeology and the layering of things, and how, in the city, we layer as we go. I like what Rafael Moneo talks about: the city is in constant construction. We are always constructing. And these are etchings that I did at Warren Editions. I quite like the etching process. It's also a meditative kind of way of drawing, and you're scratching into brass, and you work with processes, intaglio processes such as aqua tint and dry point and so on. So I really like to expand on that. But it was at one stadium in my life that I did this. And this is a detail of another etching, and you can read in it the sort of architecture. I like the invisible cities idea. I still like to promote the idea of Calvino's invisible cities being illustrated in etchings, but that's quite a huge ambition to have. So yes, this is just from one of my sketchbooks. So I've got during lockdown, I have about 12 of these sketchbooks. It's full of poetry and drawings. And sometimes I've learned from Louise Bourgeois that if you can't sleep, it's also a good thing to make drawings. And then some of the drawings then become paintings, so they got a theme of urban paintings. You can read this city structure there. This is another painting, also inspired by Nicolas de Stael, which was sort of an artist from Russian and French origin who worked in Antibes, and he had this way of painting with palette knife. So the layering of things for me is important. And then I also enjoy the iPad. So this was a collage that I made of several mountains, and then it developed into a painting. But the painting is really a painting of the sketch. So in a sense, keeping the lines that govern that and keeping the sketchiness of it. This is still unfinished, but something I've been working on during this lockdown time. And I think that's that.